Hey everyone, my name is Tim, and this is So You Want Me to Believe. I hope everyone is staying safe during this weird time. I know I joked about the coronavirus in last week's episode, but I had no idea it was going to become this serious. It seems that a lot of people want to downplay the seriousness of the situation and blame the media for putting the world into a frenzy. I do think there are a lot of people who are behaving erratically in a panic, but I also think there's a lot of misinformation out there and people aren't taking it as seriously as they should. It's not my intention to lecture anyone, but please do your research and listen to the advice from the CDC and the World Health Organization. Try to keep yourself and your neighbors safe. On a different note, I appear to have gotten a small spike in downloads in the last week, so welcome to the new listeners. I hope you've enjoyed the first 4 episodes. As always, please email me any suggestions you have for the show, whether that be topic ideas or ways I could improve the episodes. My email address is sywmtbpod@gmail.com, and I look forward to hearing from you. I thought this week's historical fun fact was pretty relevant to our current situation. I want to give a huge shout out to Kim Schmidt, who wrote the article I'm referencing back in 2018, and to the folks at the Champaign County History Museum for bringing this article to my attention in their newsletter. Links to both the original article and the museum's website will be in the show notes. Also, as a side note, the Champaign County History Museum is a completely volunteer-run nonprofit and survives solely on donations. If you're a fan of history, please check out their website and consider providing a donation. Today, we're all on lockdown and taking precaution against the current coronavirus pandemic, so I thought it would only be appropriate to talk about the Spanish flu outbreak that took place a little over 100 years ago, but specifically how it impacted day-to-day life. The research article from which I'm getting my information focuses on the events at the University of Illinois in 1918 and how the Spanish flu pandemic affected the students and the local community. If you aren't familiar with the Spanish flu pandemic, this occurred from 1918 to 1919 and was the deadliest global virus outbreak in recent history, killing roughly 50 million people during the 15 months of the pandemic. The outbreak began in October of 1918, 1 month prior to the end of World War I. This was the first outbreak of the H1N1 influenza that we saw again in a mild form in 2009. For some perspective, the bubonic plague lasted about 100 years, taking the lives of about 75 million people over the course of its lifetime. The Spanish flu managed to do roughly the same, taking the lives of about 50 million people, but over the course of only 15 months. Unlike the coronavirus, of which the most susceptible are those of a more advanced age or those with an already compromised immune system, the strain of influenza classified as the Spanish flu was targeting young, healthy people who were not usually a high risk for lethal complications from a flu. During this time, the government and public health officials were discouraging the gathering of crowds. Events were canceled and businesses essentially just shut down. Today we're seeing and hearing the same. Many schools and universities are closing their doors and moving to an online format where available. The same was the case for the University of Illinois in 1918. According to Schmidt's article, by October 6th, sorority rushing season was postponed indefinitely. Organ recitals were canceled, student soldiers were ordered to avoid groups around soda fountains, pool halls, and cigar stores, and to stay away from moving picture shows and dances. These measures were necessary, but simply weren't enough to stop the spread of the illness. Fraternity houses and dance halls were transformed into makeshift infirmaries run by dedicated staff members who also tended to the students and their needs while they were ill. Now, obviously, the circumstances are different today than they were in 1918. A virus can spread just as easily, but both our technology and the medical field have made extraordinary advances since then. And while we're just in the beginning stages of our current situation and we don't know what is to come, there is one glaringly similar occurrence already taking place, and that is how the community can come together to help one another in times of need. I've been seeing posts from all across the country where parents are worried for their children being able to get access to lunch while the schools are closed. Now, to me, there is another political element that needs to be addressed here, but that's a whole different conversation altogether. But in response to the concerns of families who may not be able to provide adequately for their children right now, I'm seeing a lot of businesses offering free lunches to children that normally would have been provided by the school system. And while that is just a small courtesy that those businesses are offering, it's great to see the community come together for the greater good. During the Spanish flu outbreak, when things were dire, the community also came together to help those in need. The staff at the University of Illinois assisted medical practitioners in caring for those who were sick and helping to ensure that the mortality rate remained low. And because of their attentiveness and support, only 19 students lost their lives to the disease among the roughly 2,400 that were infected. If you don't already know, Patreon is an online membership platform that provides business tools for creators to run a subscription content service. It allows subscribers or patrons to help creators to continue producing content while offering exclusive rewards and perks for their support. The link to my Patreon page is www.patreon.com/SYWMTBpod. There are 3 tiers, each with their own set of incentives. If you'd like to check those out, follow the link to the page and they are provided there for you. If you do like the show, please consider subscribing to the Patreon. Everyone who subscribes not only gets exclusive content, but it goes a long way in helping me produce the show. Any support is greatly appreciated. I also want to plug Buzzsprout. I don't have enough of a listener base to get an actual sponsor. To be clear, Buzzsprout is not sponsoring the show, but they are a great service that offers content creators affiliate partnerships, so I do want you to know about them. Buzzsprout is a podcast hosting service that allows creators to put the content they make out into the world. If you've ever been interested in starting your own podcast like I'm doing now, Buzzsprout is an excellent resource to help you achieve that goal. Following the link in the show notes lets Buzzsprout know I sent you, get you a $20 Amazon gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, and help support the show. I use Buzzsprout, and it's really helped make putting out the podcast an easy task. Buzzsprout offers a lot of useful and convenient features, like tons of guides to help you find the right equipment at the right price, getting your show listed in every major podcast platform, and by providing a great-looking podcast website that includes audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and more. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners. The team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. So join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. This week's episode is going to focus entirely on conspiracy theories relating to different celebrities. This type of conspiracy theory is honestly my favorite to talk about. They are pretty harmless in the grand scheme of things, but if they're true, they're pretty twisted stories that show a dark side to being a celebrity and on a larger scale to humanity. There are a ton of famous celebrity conspiracy theories, like with Tupac or Elvis, but those have been told a million times over, and I'm not as interested in those. But there are some popular theories that I am very much interested in, so I'm just going to dive right in with my favorite set of theories, and those are the celebrity imposters. One of the most famous examples of this is the theory that Paul McCartney of the Beatles actually died in 1966, and the person we now acknowledge as Paul McCartney is just a look-alike impersonator. This is a long-running conspiracy theory. It began circulating in 1967, but grew in popularity after the rumor began circulating on college campuses in 1969. The theory developed in January of 1967, stating that Paul McCartney had actually been killed in a car accident in London on November 9, 1966. The story is that Paul had a fight with his bandmate, Ringo, in the early hours that Wednesday morning. Paul became incredibly upset and drove off in a fury in his Austin Healey 3000. While driving, he came across a woman by the name of Rita, who was in need of a ride. So of course, Paul was happy to assist this beautiful young lady and give her a ride to where she needed to go. But unfortunately, Paul would not reach his or Rita's intended destinations. He crashed his car somewhere in London, which killed both him and Rita. Ringo was sitting at his home waiting for Paul to return, and he just never did. The band was devastated when they found out, and John Lennon would have the responsibility of burying his friend and bandmate. He took him to the Strawberry Fields Cemetery and personally put him in the ground and buried him. The Beatles were the biggest band in the world at the time, and the British government swore the band to secrecy in fear that Paul's death would cause society to be in an uproar across the world. So they found a look-alike and replaced Paul in the band. The body double they found was supposedly a man by the name of William Shears Campbell, a Canadian man who had mysteriously gone missing and was never seen again. It should be noted that Billy Shears was a real person who really did go missing. But the theory here is that the Beatles hired him as a double for Paul McCartney, and even had him undergo reconstructive surgery on his face in order to get him to look more like Paul. This theory has been circulating for some time, and there are a lot of people who truly believe it, and they have a lot of convincing arguments that almost all relate back to the Beatles' music and art. People have theorized that the Beatles all felt terrible about having to bury their friend and then having to hide his death from everyone, so they started hiding little messages here and there to allude to the fact that there was something to this rumor that Paul was, in fact, dead. Some of these messages were hidden in their music. The most famous example of this is in the song Revolution 9 from their self-titled White album released in 1968. This is a strange song for sure, but if you listen to it as is, there doesn't appear to be any references to Paul's passing. It just seems to be a bizarre song that honestly doesn't seem to be in the same style as the rest of their music. But if you listen to it backwards, there are several hidden messages in it. I wanted to add a little bit of that audio into this episode, but I decided against it because I'm not sure if I can legally do that or not, so I thought I'd better not just to be safe. And to be quite honest, it kind of creeps me out to listen to it. Not necessarily because of the supposed content either, it kind of sounds super eerie when played backwards, and it makes me feel like I'm in some kind of horror movie. But you can find it on YouTube pretty easily if you want to listen to it. When played backwards, there are several things you can hear that seem to be too much of a coincidence to not be real. For example, the song features someone just saying the words "number 9" over and over, and when played backwards, that sounds like "turn me on, dead man." And there's also a line in the song that says, "I'm not in the mood for wearing clothing," which backwards sounds like "there were two, there are none now." You're also supposed to be able to hear a car crash when played in reverse. These are just a few examples of things you can hear in the song. I would highly recommend listening to it for yourself to see if you can hear it too. It's also theorized that the song Lovely Rita was actually written about the woman who died with Paul in the car crash. There are other songs, though, that contain lyrics that seem to directly infer that Paul is dead. In the song Don't Pass Me By, also from the White Album, Ringo sings, "I listen for your footsteps coming up the drive. I listen for your footsteps, but they don't arrive. I'm sorry that I doubt you, I was so unfair. You were in a car crash and you lost your hair." In another song from the White Album, titled "I'm So Tired," there's a bit right at the end of the song where you can hear John speaking, but you can't quite make out what he's saying. It really just sounds like gibberish. But when you play this bit backwards, you can clearly hear him say, "Paul is dead, man. Miss him, miss him, miss him." And in the song Strawberry Fields Forever from the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, released in 1967, there's a part in the song where John is supposedly saying the words cranberry sauce. It's hard to make out what he's actually saying, but if you really listen to it, it sure sounds like he's saying, "I buried Paul." That's not the only oddity with the Sgt. Pepper album, though. There are some theories that say the cover to this album is supposed to represent Paul's funeral. This is a pretty busy cover, so if you really want to take a look at it, I would suggest you Google it. But essentially, it's an image of several people who were cut and pasted into the image and appear to be crowded behind the Beatles dressed in brightly colored clothing, representing this fictitious band. Part of this crowd is a mournful-looking set of the actual Beatles, staring down at a set of flowers in the ground that spell out "The Beatles." That is supposedly a hint in itself. But the real theory here comes in when you take a look at the bass drum right in the middle of the cover. The drum says Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band on it, with Lonely Hearts spelled out across the middle of the drum head. If you take a mirror image of the top half of the drum and put it upside down on the bottom, it appears to read 119. This is supposedly a reference to the date of Paul's death, November 9th. You can also see a patch on Paul's arm that looks as if it reads OPD, which people have theorized stands for officially pronounced dead. Of course, the band has come forward about that, stating that it actually says OPP, which stands for Ontario Provincial Police. Now, I've seen some people say, well, why would he be wearing an Ontario Police patch on his arm to legitimize the officially pronounced dead theory? But I've also seen where people think that it is an Ontario Police patch, and that actually it's a reference to the new Paul, actually being Billy Shears, who happens to be Canadian. Also, Paul has his back to the camera in this cover photo. There are more examples of this where Paul's positioning is in a sort of juxtaposition with the rest of the band, but there's a few more things I want to mention with the Sgt. Pepper album first. There's also a doll sitting on the far right of the image. This is a pretty unnoticeable fact of the photo, but like I said, it's a really busy image. But if you look closely at the doll, there are two items around it that spark some question. First, you can see a driving glove to the right of the doll that appears to be covered in blood. And on the left-hand side of the doll, there's a small model car which appears to be painted red on the inside. Obviously, theorists believe this is a blatant reference to the car crash. Now, when you look at the back cover of the album, you can see George pointing seemingly deliberately at a specific line that reads, "Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock. November 9, the day Paul supposedly died, was in fact a Wednesday. So the theory here is that 5 a.m. was when Paul would have been pronounced dead, and the band purposefully pointed to that line on the back cover for that reason. The Sgt. Pepper album is just the first of several albums that people have looked over for clues of Paul's death, but perhaps the most famous album that people claim to show evidence of a cover-up is the Abbey Road album, released in September of 1969. The iconic cover of this album shows the members of the band walking across a crosswalk in a line. I'm sure everyone knows what this album looks like, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about the image itself, but if you want to take a look at it, I would suggest you Google this one as well. Theorists say the Abbey Road cover was completely intentional down to the smallest detail to allude to the fact that Paul is no longer alive. If you take a look at the band members themselves, you'll notice immediately the clothes they are wearing. Supposedly this was intended to look like a funeral procession. You'll see John in the front wearing all white as the preacher. Ringo is directly behind him wearing all black as the undertaker. At the back of the line, you'll see George wearing blue jeans as the gravedigger, who would be the last to leave the funeral. And just in front of George, you'll see Paul also dressed in black as the deceased. You will also notice that Paul is out of step with the rest of the group, is smoking a cigarette, and is barefoot. All of this is meant to symbolize the real Paul's death. There are several theories about the Abbey Road cover, but one of the most interesting theories is the car on the left-hand side of the street. It's a white Beetle with a license plate that reads 28 if. This is interesting because Paul would actually have been 28 years old if he had not died on the date that this album was released. Other albums the band released had some similar questions surrounding them, although none of them quite as detailed as the Sgt. Pepper album or Abbey Road. For example, they released a compilation album titled A Collection of Beatle Oldies in 1966, which shows a cartoon-style Paul relaxing in the middle of the image, but there also appears to be a car heading straight for his head. On the cover of the Let It Be album, released in 1970, there is a sort of Brady Bunch-style depiction of the band members in which all of them are looking up and to the left with a white background. All of them, except for Paul, who is looking straight ahead and has a red background. And even beyond just songs and photos, there is some theory surrounding their performances. An example of this is from their Magical Mystery Tour film released in 1967. There is a scene in which the band is dressed in all white shirts and wearing carnations. All of the band members are wearing red carnations, except Paul, who is wearing a black carnation. Now, normally I'd be on the same page as the majority here by saying this is all just a big coincidence and that people are reading too much into things. But then why is there always a juxtaposition between Paul and the rest of the band? It seems almost too coincidental for it not to have been intentional. Paul, or Billy, has commented on this himself. He and the rest of the band have been aware of the conspiracy theory since it surfaced in 1969. He has been quoted as saying, "If I were dead, I'd be the last to know." And when it's brought up in other interviews, they all just seem to laugh it off. Despite the insistence by the band that there is nothing to this theory, people are still pulling theories together. People who have analyzed photos of Paul pre and post the supposed date of death say they see a significant difference in Paul's appearance, beginning to refer to him as fake Paul or Fall. They say that the two of them are different heights, their ears are shaped differently, and his eyes even changed color. Paul's eyes were brown, but Fall's eyes are green. I'm not too sure about the accuracy of that one. I did see pictures where they had different eye colors, but I have no way of knowing if those pictures had been altered or not. Fall himself has also made light of the theory by putting out a solo album in 1993 titled Paul is Live, the cover of which is a recreation of the Abbey Road cover with just Paul. But even today, people are coming up with new ideas that Fall is actually subtly continuing the theory rather than just making fun of it. In 2007, he released another solo album titled Memory Almost Full that featured a song called Gratitude. In this song, Fall sings, "Loved by you, show my gratitude, gratitude, gratitude." But when you play this bit backwards, oddly enough, you can hear very clearly the words, "Who is this now? Who is this now? Who is this now? I was Willie Campbell." Paul McCartney isn't the only celebrity to have theories surrounding him that they were actually dead. A lot of these theories involve the occult or cloning though, and that's not nearly as compelling to me as a body double story. Because while the body double story may be hard to believe, the arguments are actually pretty logical if you keep an open mind about it. And I just can't entertain witchcraft, conspiracy, or a theory involving demons. There are several of these out there if you're interested in looking them up yourselves. Some of those include Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, and other bands like that. But sticking with the body double theory, another favorite of mine is the theory surrounding Avril Lavigne. This is a theory that circulated online a few times in recent years, and supposedly people would say that it's been debunked. But others aren't so sure. This theory states that Avril Lavigne actually killed herself at the height of her career in 2003 when she was becoming a household name. She was struggling with the pressure that came along with being a celebrity, and they even hired a woman who just happened to look almost identical to her by the name of Melissa Vandella. Melissa would go out in public in Avril's place to have her picture taken by the paparazzi, and would even go so far as to have her perform as Avril in concert on occasion when Avril was not in the right headspace. After Avril's suicide in 2003, believing she was going to be the biggest star in the world, her team covered up her death and asked Melissa to step in as a permanent body double for Avril, and to continue living her life as Avril Lavigne. Now, if you think it's just too unrealistic that there could be someone who looks exactly like Avril Lavigne out there, I would encourage you to look up a TikTok performer by the name of Paige Neiman. Paige looks exactly like Ariana Grande, to the point that people didn't realize it wasn't her posting the videos. There are a couple of theories to how Avril could have died. Some people seem to believe she died in a snowboarding accident, but from what I've gathered, that theory was attributed to a website that has insisted several celebrities had died in the same manner, just as clickbait. The most prominent theory is that Avril Lavigne committed suicide, but it's not clear exactly how. If I'm going to fall into this theory, though, I'm going to say that I would think the theory would be that she died by hanging, which I'll explain in a minute. So this theory is basically surrounded almost completely on Avril's musical and personal style changes during that time period. Avril Lavigne was well known for her punk rock style when releasing her biggest hits like Complicated and Skater Boy. Her music was edgy, and she was constantly seen sporting her signature tie and wife-beater fashion. But since 2003, there has been a noticeable shift in her style. She's become less punk rock and more pop princess. She started wearing clothing that was more feminine, and her music style drastically changed as well. She went from "he was a skater boy, she said see you later boy" to "hey hey kitty kitty, you're so pretty pretty," which many of her fans believe to be too drastic of a change for it to be the actual Avril's ideas. We see artists evolve all the time. Music styles and fashion senses change, and it's been 18 years now since Avril Lavigne released her first album, Let Go. Her style was bound to change up a little bit during that time, but theorists say that the changes were far too drastic for a former punk rocker to make, and therefore it's not the real Avril. And with that, they believe Let Go is the only album Avril Lavigne released in which the songs were entirely hers. Her sophomore release, Under My Skin, in 2004, supposedly contains some tracks believed to be recorded by the actual Avril Lavigne, but that the majority of the album was written and sung by Melissa Vandella. There are a few songs that contain lyrics that people theorize are hidden messages about Avril Lavigne's death. A few examples of those are lyrics from the song Nobody's Home from the Under My Skin album that read, "She wants to go home, but nobody's home. It's where she lies, broken inside. With no place to go dry her eyes, broken inside. She's fallen from grace, she's all over the place." And lyrics from her song My Happy Ending, also from the Under My Skin album, that read, "Don't leave me hanging in a city so dead, held up so high on such unbreakable thread." These specific lyrics are what led people to believe she committed suicide, and what leads me to believe that it would have been by hanging if it were true. And then one other song from the Under My Skin album called Slipped Away has lyrics that read, "It wasn't fake, it happened, you passed by. Now you are gone, now you are gone. There you go, somewhere I can't bring you back." Some people also believe that there's evidence in some of her videos. In the video for the song Nobody's Home, Avril is seen playing two different versions of herself, almost as if one is the former her and one is the new her. Several people think that's an indication that the real Avril is gone and Melissa is stepping in as the new Avril. But there's also some physical qualities in her videos that people question. In the video for her song Wish You Were Here from her album titled Goodbye Lullaby, released in 2011, there are scenes in which Avril looks like a completely different person than she does in other scenes. The theory here is that they used some old footage of the real Avril and mixed it with new footage of Melissa to create the full video. There are points in the video where when there is a close-up of her face, the shape of her eyes is completely different and her jawline seems to have changed. A lot of that could be explained by aging and possibly fillers or some sort of plastic surgery, but the eye shape differences seem to be unexplainable. People also theorize that the noticeable difference in her eye shape is why Avril is now known to wear very heavy black eye makeup to possibly cover up any changes. But there are other physical differences. Her height seems to have shifted also. Supposedly, if you googled her height, it used to come up saying she was 5'2", but now it comes up saying she's 5'1". Now, you may think it's 1 inch, that's not a huge difference, and maybe they just had inaccurate information in the past. Well, maybe that's true, or maybe Melissa is really 1 inch shorter than Avril Lavigne. Other differences people have pointed out is that her birthmarks and moles seem to have changed or are completely gone. Supposedly a tattoo of hers has completely gone missing, and she's even lost her Canadian accent in interviews. You can't hear her accent so much when she's singing, but her accent was very evident in her normal speaking voice. Now, I don't personally think her accent has changed much over the years, but other people seem to believe there's a drastic difference in her speaking voice now. And speaking of her voice, people also think she sounds different in her older music than she does in her newer music. There are tons of comparison videos on YouTube, and I found one where a professional voice trainer spoke about the comparisons, saying the sound quality is different and it's clear that she's had some vocal coaching, which brightened her sound a bit. But some people think it's more than that. Theorists say her voice changed with her style not because she evolved as an artist or got some training, but because this was Melissa's style and that she inserted it into the Avril Lavigne brand when she took over. Now, again, Avril Lavigne is aware of this conspiracy theory, and when she's asked about it, she simply just laughs it off. And a lot of people think that's a little strange that she just refuses to even talk about it. But if the information thus far has not convinced you yet, there is a photo shoot you can find online where Avril is shot with a plain white background, holding her fist in front of her. But on her fist is a word written in black marker. That word? Melissa. I have one last imposter story that I want to cover before moving on to something else, and this one is just a little brief, but this one is a little more relevant as the person in question is still big in the spotlight today, and that person is Melania Trump. Now, Trump supporters refute this, and the White House has even recognized the theory and called it fake news. I don't want to imply that I think it's true, because honestly it's a little bit of a stretch, but I am including it here because it's not a total impossibility. Especially if you can believe the last two stories about famous musicians, imagine what a powerful government could do to protect a secret about one of its own figures. As you might recall, in May of 2018, Melania Trump kind of disappeared from the public eye for a while. 5 weeks to be exact. During that time, there was a lot of speculation as to where she was. Officially, the White House has stated that she was having a minimally invasive surgery called an embolization, which from what I understand is a procedure that blocks blood vessels. So she had the surgery and needed time to recover from it. But of course, people aren't buying that. I think that sounds totally plausible, but I would be lying if I said I didn't think it also sounds like a convenient cover-up. So, many people believe that Melania either left Donald Trump, not ever truly wanting to be the First Lady, or was somehow killed and replaced with a body double. And it should be noted that the White House did not immediately comment on Melania's absence. Now, that could be because the Trump administration has often refused to comment on puff pieces like this, which is completely understandable, but it struck a lot of people as odd that they would not simply just say where she was. There are other theories that say, well, maybe she was having surgery, but maybe it was something more elective than an embolization. Maybe she was having a facelift or some other type of plastic surgery, and the White House didn't think it was anyone's business what she was having done. Melania was formerly a model, so for her to have a procedure like that wouldn't really surprise many people. But a lot of people who have those kinds of things done don't exactly want to make it public knowledge. However, this still isn't enough to quell many people's theories. The next time Melania was seen exiting Air Force One in Brussels, she looked somewhat different and people couldn't really put their finger on what it was. Obviously, the plastic surgery theory would explain that, but a lot of people still weren't buying it. Things really hit the fan for this theory in 2019 after devastating tornadoes touched down in Alabama, and Donald Trump and Melania were photographed visiting the site. A lot of people think the pictures taken of her on the visit look like a totally different person. Her face shape is different, she's not as tall as she once was, and overall seems to show more public affection of her husband than she had in the past. She was also only photographed wearing sunglasses, which most people thought to be odd. Personally, I think that's part of Melania's personal style, and it doesn't really strike me as odd, but some people seem to think she was wearing the oversized sunglasses in an attempt to hide her face so many people wouldn't notice it's not actually Melania. Like I said, the Trump administration says this is fake news, but we've heard that a lot about things that weren't totally fake, so I'll let you decide how you feel about that one. Moving on from the imposter theories, I have 3 other celebrity conspiracy theories I want to talk about. These are not nearly as detailed as the imposter theories, so these will be quite brief, and I'm only including them in this episode because they are really interesting to think about, and they differ quite a bit from the imposter theories we've already covered. The first theory is either hilarious or disgusting, and I can't really decide how I feel about it. But the theory is that Katy Perry isn't who she says she is. But in fact, Katy Perry is really just JonBenet Ramsey all grown up. That's right, JonBenet Ramsey, the little 9-year-old girl who was known for participating in child beauty pageants, whose murder shocked the world in the 90s. The theory here is that JonBenet Ramsey never actually died and grew up to be Katy Perry. This one has two different angles to it, so if you're familiar with the JonBenet Ramsey case, which I plan to cover in a different episode at some point, you know that the whole thing started with a ransom note found in the Ramsey's kitchen saying she was kidnapped, and ended with the discovery of her body in the basement a few days later. To this day, they still do not know who killed JonBenet. But obviously, conspiracy theorists out there don't believe anyone killed her. One theory is that JonBenet truly was kidnapped and that her new parents pushed her into celebrity, starting with the Christian music she used to produce and ultimately performing under the name Katy Perry on a much larger scale. Others think the whole thing was a publicity stunt put on by the Ramsey family, and that not only did she not die, she wasn't kidnapped. Supposedly, this theory states that Patsy Ramsey, who died of cancer a couple years after JonBenet's death, never actually had cancer. She just lost weight and changed her name and other aspects of her appearance, moving from Boulder, Colorado out to Santa Barbara, California with her daughter. Then, after some time and the news coverage died down, John Ramsey would shave his head, change other aspects of his appearance, and join Patsy in California as a born-again Christian who would become a pastor. Now, this one is pretty ridiculous because obviously John Ramsey is still alive and still makes public appearances, but people still argue that maybe he's just living a double life. And you have to admit there are some physical similarities between Katy Perry and pictures of JonBenet Ramsey. I mean, if they were to make a movie about Katy Perry's childhood and JonBenet was still alive, you couldn't find more of a match to play a young Katy. But even more strange is that in Katy Perry's memoir, which she has apparently written, she wrote, "Not that I was one of those stage kids. There was no JonBenet Ramsey inside me waiting to burst out." Now, why would she write that? The next theory I want to talk about involves Bob Marley. Now, I won't pretend to know very much about Bob Marley. I've never listened to his music, although he seems to be pretty popular among the stoner crowd still. But Bob Marley was a huge music and cultural icon in the 70s and apparently had a pretty huge cult following that the US government became pretty concerned about. Officially, Bob Marley died in 1981 of skin cancer that spread to his lungs and brain. However, conspiracy theorists believe that Bob Marley was actually killed by the CIA, who wanted him taken out because of its influence on so many people and feared that he was capable of starting some sort of revolution. Some people think he was actually poisoned by the CIA, but others seem to believe this idea that the government gave him cancer. I'm not sure if that's even actually a thing that's possible, but who knows what the government is actually hiding from people. In 1976, Bob Marley faced his first assassination attempt when people broke into his home with guns and shot at him. They almost killed him then too. In fact, I read an article that said had Marley been inhaling instead of exhaling at the time of impact, he certainly would have been killed. I don't know too much more about that, but that's a real medical fact that exists about the shooting. But some people believe that the shooting, which took the life of Marley's wife, Rita, was orchestrated by the CIA. And in fact, Bob Marley's manager insists that he and Marley were at a ghetto court where the shooters were tried and executed, and just before he was to be killed, one of the shooters admitted that they were contracted by the CIA to kill Marley in exchange for cocaine and guns. This attempt was obviously unsuccessful, but there's more to that CIA theory. A man by the name of Bill Oxley, who was ex-CIA, supposedly admitted on his deathbed to murdering Bob Marley. He said he gained access to Bob Marley's home by posing as a New York Times photographer. He said, "I gave him a pair of Converse All-Stars, size 10. When he tried on the right shoe, he screamed out." Supposedly, this means that he had planted a needle in the shoe, and when Marley tried it on, it pricked his big toe and injected him with something that caused his cancer. Now, officially, the story has been debunked as false. But truly, if the government wanted to stop the truth of an incident from coming to life, don't you think they could? They're capable of a lot more than we can imagine. I mean, they did kill Bob Marley. And finally, the last story I want to address here involves Britney Spears. Now, this one is actually kind of plausible, although it's pretty basic, so there's really not that much to talk about. This theory is that Britney Spears was actually on the payroll of the Bush administration, and that her very public breakdown in the early 2000s was staged as a distraction for the shortcomings of the government. We hear a lot about media distractions even now, and I don't know if I believe it to be true or not, but if it is true now, it certainly could have been true then too. And if it's not true, the timing of these events must have been a major coincidence. Here are just a few examples of several that you can find. In January of 2004, a Bush crony blew the cover of a CIA agent by the name of Valerie Plame, which eventually led to the indictment of Scooter Libby, who was a top-tier Bush official. Just 1 week before Scooter Libby's trial was set to be held, Britney married her childhood friend, Jason Alexander, in a Vegas chapel. This was the marriage that she had annulled only 55 hours later. In April of 2006, Bush's approval rating hit an all-time low at about 38%. At the same time, Britney got in trouble with Child Protective Services for being seen driving her car with her infant son sitting on her lap. And in February of 2007, Bush announced the reformation of Al-Qaeda. On that same night, Britney escaped from her rehab facility, goes to a salon where she shaves her head, and then attacks the paparazzi with an umbrella. These are just a few examples of many, and you could say that she was just having a tough time mentally at the same time that a lot of gaffes were taking place in the US government. But in 2008, all of the drama surrounding Britney Spears suddenly dried up. Is that because her father put her under the now infamous conservatorship? Or could it be because Bush was no longer in office and there was no longer any need for her services? So that's all I have for you this week. Celebrity conspiracy theories are some of my favorites to research and talk about, so at some point I may do different celebrities. If you have any examples of celebrity conspiracy theories you'd like to hear me talk about, or if you have any other suggestions for future episode topics, please feel free to let me know by sending me an email at sywmtbpod@gmail.com. If you like the show, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Good ratings and reviews help others find the show, and they also make me feel good about myself. If you didn't like the show, I'm very sorry that you have such poor taste, but thanks for listening till the end anyway. Please remember to check out my Patreon page and join a tier for extra content and other fun updates. The link to that is in the show notes. Also, please follow me on social media. You can like me on Facebook. The page is titled So You Want Me to Believe Podcast. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter. My handle is at SYWMTBpod on both platforms. Thank you once again for listening to this week's episode, and I will see you all again next week.